Because the truth doesn't matter in a room that already chose its liar. Olivia Brooks said it so softly that most people in the Lancaster mansion never heard it. But Victor Lancaster did, and for the first time that night, the most feared man in New York forgot the signature waiting in front of him. The ballroom glittered like a cathedral built for money. All white marble, gold-trimmed walls, crystal glasses, and chandeliers throwing warm light over men in tailored black suits, and women wearing diamonds that could have paid rent for an entire block in Queens. Outside, February wind scraped against the tall windows, but inside, the air smelled of champagne, roses, and polished wood. Olivia moved through that world in a simple black uniform, carrying a silver tray with both hands, her dark skin glowing under the chandelier light, her natural curls pinned neatly at the back of her head. She had learned to walk without sound in that house. She had learned which guests wanted coffee, which ones wanted bourbon, and which ones looked through her as if she were part of the furniture. That night was supposed to be historic. Victor Lancaster, a white mafia boss with gray eyes and a silence that could tighten a room, was preparing to sign a private alliance with the Harrington family, sealed by his engagement to Celeste Harrington, a woman whose smile was perfect enough to hide every sharp edge beneath it. Celeste stood beside him in a cream silk dress, one hand resting lightly on his arm, playing the part of the future queen of the Lancaster Empire. Then her diamond bracelet slipped from her wrist and clattered across the marble floor. Every conversation stopped. Olivia was 3 feet away, holding a tray of untouched champagne. Celeste looked down at the bracelet, then up at Olivia, and her smile changed. "Check her apron," she said, not loudly, not angrily, but with the polished calm of someone used to being believed. Olivia's fingers tightened around the tray. "Ma'am, I didn't touch it." Celeste gave a small laugh, the kind that made other people feel invited to join. "Of course you didn't." A few guests shifted closer. Someone murmured, "These things happen when staff get too comfortable." Victor's eyes moved from the contract to Olivia, but he said nothing. Olivia set the tray down carefully, as if any sudden movement might become another accusation. A young kitchen assistant named Rachel stepped forward, pale and trembling. "She didn't do anything. I saw the bracelet fall." Celeste turned her head slowly. Rachel looked at the floor. The room had already chosen its truth. Olivia understood that look. She had seen it in offices, hospitals, courtrooms, and homes where women like her were expected to swallow humiliation and call it gratitude. When the house manager reached for her apron pocket, Olivia lifted both hands and let him search. There was nothing inside but a folded napkin and a receipt from a pharmacy in Brooklyn. The bracelet lay exactly where Celeste had dropped it, shining near the leg of a white leather chair. Still, nobody apologized. Nobody rushed to correct the lie. Celeste simply picked it up and fastened it back around her wrist, her blue eyes never leaving Olivia's face. Rachel leaned close and whispered, "Why are you letting them do this?" Olivia's answer barely rose above the hush of the room. "Because the truth doesn't matter in a room that already chose its liar." Across the ballroom, Victor Lancaster stopped breathing for one long second. He had heard threats, confessions, promises, and betrayals spoken in every kind of voice. But that sentence was different. It did not beg. It did not accuse. It carried the exhaustion of someone who had been innocent too many times for innocence to save her. The guests began talking again, eager to smooth the moment back into luxury. Celeste touched Victor's sleeve and said, "Shall we continue?" But Victor did not pick up the pen. He was still looking at Olivia Brooks, the maid everyone had tried to make invisible, and something cold and dangerous shifted behind his eyes. Olivia Brooks had not always been quiet. Years before she learned to lower her eyes in rooms full of expensive people, she had been the kind of young woman who raised her hand first, asked the difficult question, and believed that numbers could tell the truth when people refused to. She grew up in a narrow brick apartment building in Brooklyn, 4 floors above a corner grocery, where the radiators clanged all winter and the summer heat pressed against the windows until the paint softened. Her father, Harold Brooks, worked as a bookkeeper for a midtown finance company, a careful man who wore the same brown jacket for 12 years and kept every receipt in labeled envelopes. He taught Olivia how to balance a ledger at the kitchen table, using grocery bills, bus fare, and rent checks as if they were pieces of a secret language. "Money leaves footprints," he used to say, tapping a pencil against the page. "And if you follow them honestly, They will tell you where the truth went. Olivia believed him. She earned a scholarship to study forensic accounting at a small college upstate, and for a while, her future seemed larger than survival. Then one autumn morning, her father came home early with his tie loosened and his face emptied of color. Missing funds, altered records, his name on documents he swore he had never approved. The company needed someone to blame, and Harold Brooks, quiet, loyal, and without powerful friends, was easy to place at the center of a lie. Olivia spent the next 8 months watching doors close. Lawyers asked for retainers her family could not afford. Former co-workers stopped answering calls. Men who once shook her father's hand suddenly spoke about policy, procedure, and unfortunate circumstances. Harold waited for one person with influence to stand up and say what everyone privately knew, that he was being used to protect people above him. No one did. By spring, the stress had hollowed him out. He died before his name was cleared, leaving behind a stack of labeled envelopes, a worn Bible, and a daughter who no longer believed truth won simply because it was true. Olivia left school 2 semesters before graduation and came home to help her mother keep the apartment. She cleaned offices at night, worked hotel laundry in the mornings, and eventually took private housekeeping jobs because they paid better and asked fewer questions. That was how she entered the Lancaster mansion 6 months later, through a side door near the service kitchen, carrying 2 references, a cheap black purse, and a promise to herself that she would never again mistake silence for surrender. In Victor Lancaster's house, silence was a language everyone spoke fluently. Staff moved like shadows across polished floors. Phones were answered before the second ring. Doors opened before guests reached them. No one asked about the men who arrived after midnight or the sealed envelopes carried into the library. Olivia learned the rules quickly. Keep your head down. Remember every preference. Never look surprised. Above all, never become part of the story. But Celeste Harrington made that impossible. From the first week, Celeste noticed the way Olivia saw details others missed: the swapped place card, the copied key, the wrong initials embossed on a leather folder. She smiled whenever Olivia entered a room, but the smile never reached her eyes. To everyone else, Celeste was elegant, educated, perfect for Victor. To Olivia, she was a woman who touched expensive things like she was already measuring what they would be worth once they belonged to her. And after the bracelet accusation in the ballroom, Olivia understood something with a cold certainty that settled beneath her ribs. Celeste had not made a mistake. She had sent a message: stay invisible, or become the next person this house chooses not to believe. By midnight, the Lancaster mansion had returned to its polished rhythm, but Olivia could feel the air had changed. The bracelet incident had passed through the ballroom like a shadow no one wanted to name, leaving behind smiles that were too careful and glances that moved away too quickly. Celeste Harrington behaved as if nothing had happened. She laughed with donors near the fireplace, accepted compliments on her engagement ring, and rested her hand lightly on Victor Lancaster's sleeve whenever important guests came close. To anyone watching, she looked graceful, composed, and harmless. Olivia knew better. She carried empty glasses back toward the service hall, her shoes silent against the marble, and felt Celeste's attention following her like a cold hand between her shoulder blades. In the kitchen, the staff spoke in whispers. Rachel stood near the sink, twisting a dish towel until it looked ready to tear. I should have said more, she whispered. Olivia placed the glasses into the rack one by one. You said enough. Rachel shook her head. No, I got scared. Olivia looked at the younger woman gently, with no judgment in her eyes. That is how rooms like that stay powerful. They teach good people to be afraid of sounding inconvenient. Rachel's eyes filled, but Olivia turned away before the moment could become too tender. Tenderness was dangerous when there was work to finish. She stepped into the pantry to collect fresh linen napkins, and that was when she saw the first thing that did not belong. A cream envelope sat half-hidden behind a stack of imported tea tins, sealed with dark green wax instead of the Lancaster crest. Olivia knew the house inventory. She knew every delivery, every dinner card, every monogram packet used for private guests. This envelope was wrong. She did not touch it. She only looked. Through the thin paper, pressed close to the pantry light, she could make out a faint line of print from the page inside. Transfer authority upon incapacity. Her breath caught, but only for a second. She stepped back just as Celeste entered the pantry, closing the door softly behind her. "You are very curious for someone paid to carry plates," Celeste said. Her voice was smooth, almost bored. Olivia lowered her eyes. "I was getting napkins, ma'am." Celeste walked toward the shelf and picked up the envelope as if she had placed it there on purpose, as if she had wanted Olivia to see just enough to understand the danger, but not enough to prove anything. "Do you know what I admire about good staff, Olivia?" she asked. "They understand boundaries. They know which doors are not theirs to open." Olivia kept her hands folded in front of her apron. "Yes, ma'am." Celeste smiled. "I hope so. Victor values loyalty, but he values peace more. And people who disturb peace rarely last long in houses like this." It was not a threat spoken loudly enough for anyone outside the pantry to hear. That was Celeste's talent. She could wrap cruelty in manners until it sounded like advice. Olivia looked at the envelope, then at the diamond bracelet on Celeste's wrist, shining under the pantry light like a polished lie. For one moment, she thought of her father's old pencil tapping against the kitchen table. Money leaves footprints. The truth went somewhere. Find where it went. But Olivia was not in her father's kitchen. She was in the private mansion of Victor Lancaster, surrounded by people who could erase a working woman's name from a payroll file before breakfast and call it administrative housekeeping. So she nodded once and reached for the napkins. Celeste stepped aside, satisfied, but as Olivia passed, the woman whispered, "Smart girls survive by forgetting what they saw." Olivia did not answer. She walked back into the service hall with the linen pressed against her chest, her face calm, her pulse steady only because she forced it to be. At the far end of the corridor, beyond the open library door, Victor Lancaster stood half in shadow, speaking to one of his attorneys. He did not appear to look at her, but his gray eyes shifted for the briefest moment to the napkins in her arms, then to Celeste emerging from the pantry behind her. Olivia felt it then, small and almost impossible to trust. Someone had noticed the silence after all. Victor Lancaster did not believe in coincidences, not in business, not in loyalty, and certainly not inside his own home. Long after the guests returned to the ballroom and the music softened into something expensive and forgettable, he remained near the library door with a glass of untouched water in his hand, watching the house move around him. Celeste was laughing again, bright and effortless, her cream dress catching the chandelier light as if the world had been arranged to flatter her. Olivia had disappeared into the service corridor with the linen pressed to her chest and her face carefully empty. That emptiness stayed with him. Victor knew empty faces. Men wore them when they were hiding fear. Lawyers wore them when they were hiding damage. Servants wore them when they had learned the cost of being seen. He had built his life reading what people tried not to show, yet somehow he had allowed Olivia Brooks to pass through his rooms for 6 months as if she were only a quiet pair of hands. Now, one sentence had cracked that illusion open. The truth does not matter in a room that already chose its liar. He set the glass down without drinking and spoke to the man beside him. "Find out where Celeste went before dinner." His attorney, Martin Hale, paused. Tonight, Victor did not look at him. Every hallway, every call, every door. Martin's expression changed just enough to show he understood. "And Miss Brooks?" Victor's eyes moved toward the service corridor. "Leave her alone for now." That was the mercy of it, and the danger. Olivia did not know she had become the center of his attention. She only knew that her hands would not stop trembling as she rinsed silver in the back kitchen, where the air smelled of lemon soap and roasted herbs cooling on trays. Rachel had gone to deliver coffee. The other staff were busy resetting dessert plates. For the first time all night, Olivia stood alone beneath the fluorescent light, sleeves rolled to her elbows, watching water slide over her wrists. The mark Celeste's fingers had left earlier was faint, but visible, a red crescent near the bone. Olivia pressed a cold towel against it and closed her eyes. Her father's voice came back, so clearly it hurt. "Follow the footprints, Liv. Honest numbers do not panic. Liars do." She opened her eyes and whispered to the empty room. "My father died waiting for someone powerful to care about the truth." The words were not meant for anyone. They were too private, too tired, too close to the wound she kept covered with work and discipline. But the kitchen had 2 entrances, and the second one opened near the wine corridor, where Victor Lancaster stood unseen in the shadow of the half-open door. He heard every word. Something moved across his face then, not pity and not softness, but recognition. He had known men who begged, women who bargained, partners who dressed greed as strategy. He had rarely heard grief speak without asking for anything. Olivia wiped her wrist, straightened her apron, and reached for the tray of coffee cups. She turned and found Victor standing in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Somewhere far beyond the kitchen walls, guests applauded some toast Olivia could not hear. Victor looked at the towel in her hand, then at the mark on her wrist, then finally at her face. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice low enough that it did not carry. Olivia's posture tightened. "Sir." She expected dismissal, a warning, maybe a quiet order to apologize to Celeste before the night ended. Instead, Victor stepped aside from the doorway as if making room for her to pass, but his eyes did not release hers. "When this dinner is over," he said, "come to the library." Olivia's fingers tightened around the tray. "Did I do something wrong?" Victor was silent for one measured breath. Then he said, "That is what I intend to find out." The dinner ended with polite applause, a few hollow congratulations, and the soft scrape of chairs against polished marble. Guests drifted toward the West Salon for dessert, unaware that the center of the night had already moved somewhere quieter. Olivia stayed in the kitchen until the last silver coffee pot was wiped dry and the last plate was stacked for morning service. Her body wanted to go home to Brooklyn, to the small apartment where her mother would be asleep under a faded quilt, but Victor Lancaster's order followed her like a shadow. "Come to the library." At 1:15 in the morning, she stood outside the tall oak doors with her apron folded over one arm and her heartbeat steady only because she had spent years teaching it not to embarrass her. The mansion was different after midnight. Without music and conversation, every room seemed too large, too watchful. When she knocked, Victor's voice answered from inside. "Come in." The library smelled of leather, old paper, and cedarwood. Lamps glowed low over shelves that climbed nearly 20 feet, and the city lights beyond the windows looked distant, like another world where ordinary people slept without knowing men like Victor decided futures over signatures and sealed envelopes. He stood behind his desk with his suit jacket removed, white shirt sleeves buttoned at the wrist, his gray eyes fixed on a thick folder lying open before him. Martin Hale was gone. No guard stood inside. Only Victor, the contract, and silence. Olivia stopped near the door. "You wanted to see me, sir." He did not ask her to sit right away. Instead, he turned one page, then another. 6 months ago, you applied through Sterling Domestic Placement. Before that, hotel laundry, office cleaning, and 2 years at Brookline Administrative Services. Olivia's mouth went dry. "Yes, sir. Before that, you were enrolled in forensic accounting." She looked up then, not sharply, not defiantly, but with the quiet pain of a person hearing a locked drawer opened without permission. Victor noticed. He noticed everything now. "Why did you leave?" he asked. Olivia held the folded apron against her waist. "Family reasons." That is the answer people give when the truth is too expensive. The words should have sounded cruel, but they did not. They sounded like something he knew from experience. Victor moved around the desk and placed a cream envelope on the polished surface between them. The same green wax. The same wrongness she had seen in the pantry. Olivia's breath changed before her face did. Victor watched the change. "You recognize this?" "I saw it for less than 2 seconds." "That was not my question." The room tightened around her. Olivia thought of Celeste's smile, of the bracelet on the floor, of the way good people lowered their eyes when power asked them to cooperate with a lie. "I recognize the language," she said finally. Victor's expression did not shift, but his attention sharpened. "Explain." Olivia stepped closer, still careful, still aware of every inch of distance between them. The phrase transfer authority upon incapacity does not belong in a ceremonial alliance summary. It belongs in a control agreement. Someone is blending personal and corporate authority into the same document so it looks harmless during signing. Victor opened the folder fully. "And if I sign?" Olivia looked at the pages, not at him. The numbers calmed her. The margins spoke. The formatting betrayed the lie. Then the Harrington family would have a legal argument to influence Lancaster holdings if you were declared unable to manage them, even temporarily. Illness, public scandal, a medical hold, anything that makes you appear unfit. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was not dismissal. It was calculation. Victor turned the contract toward her. "Read the rest." Olivia shook her head once. You have attorneys for that. I have attorneys who missed it. His voice lowered. And I have a maid who did not. The word maid landed between them, but not the way Celeste had used it. For the first time in that house, it sounded less like a place beneath someone and more like a fact that had failed to describe the woman standing there. Olivia looked at the contract, then at Victor Lancaster, and saw not kindness, not yet, but something almost as rare. A powerful man willing to listen before the damage was done. Olivia read the contract the way her father had taught her to read a ledger, not as words meant to impress, but as footprints left by intention. Victor stood across from her in the library while the mansion slept around them, his hands resting on the back of a leather chair, his eyes never leaving her face. She moved slowly through the pages, tracing the structure without touching the paper at first, letting the pattern reveal itself. The main agreement was elegant, almost ceremonial, filled with language about unity, shared interests, and family partnership. But the danger lived in the attachments. Page 42 referenced an advisory board that had not been named in the table of contents. Page 56 gave that board temporary voting authority under emergency conditions. Page 63 defined emergency so broadly that a rumor, a canceled meeting, or a medical statement from the wrong doctor could open the door. Olivia felt the old chill spread through her chest. It was the same kind of careful trap that had taken her father's name and bent it into something false. This is not a marriage alliance, she said quietly. It is a slow transfer of control dressed up as one. Victor did not move. To Celeste. Olivia shook her head. Not directly. That would be too obvious. The authority routes through a charitable trust, then through an advisory board, then through a holding company registered in Delaware. The Harrington name barely appears, but the same three initials keep showing up in the witness codes. Victor reached for a pen and wrote them down. C.H.G. Olivia looked at him. Celeste Harrington Grant. Her full legal name before she shortened it socially. For the first time, Victor's expression changed. Not much, but enough. The air seemed to lose warmth. Olivia turned another page. There is more. She pointed to a block of numbers at the bottom of a schedule. These are not random account references. They are routing patterns. Someone is preparing to move money the moment the agreement activates. Small amounts first, then larger ones, each under a separate administrative label. Victor's voice was calm, almost too calm. Could my attorneys have missed that? Yes, Olivia said. If they were looking for legal risk instead of financial behavior. The answer hung there, clean and impossible to dismiss. Victor walked to the window, where New York glimmered beyond the glass. Towers of light floating above dark streets. He had built his life on reading powerful men, but the person who had seen through this was the woman his guests had searched like a thief less than 4 hours earlier. Behind him, Olivia closed the folder gently. I should not know any of this, she said. But you do. He turned back. Olivia held his gaze, and for the first time that night, she allowed the steel beneath her gentleness to show. My father was framed with paperwork almost exactly like this. Different company, different people, same method. Put the lie in a place no one important will read closely. Then blame the person with the least power when the truth becomes inconvenient. Victor said nothing, but his silence no longer felt like distance. It felt like a room making space for the dead. Olivia looked down at the green wax seal on the envelope. Celeste did not accuse me tonight because of the bracelet. She accused me because I saw this before I was supposed to. Victor picked up the folder and closed it with one hand. The sound was soft, but final. Tomorrow morning, he said, everyone will sit at that signing table again. Olivia's shoulders tightened. You are still going to sign? Victor's eyes settled on hers, cold, clear, and awake. No, Miss Brooks. I am going to let them believe I will. Morning came to the Lancaster mansion, dressed in pale gold and perfect manners. By 10 o'clock, the ballroom had been reset as a signing room, with white roses along the windows, silver pins placed on velvet trays, and a long mahogany table polished so brightly it reflected the chandelier above. The Harrington family arrived smiling, their coats taken by staff, their voices warm with confidence. Celeste entered last, wearing a soft blue dress and the diamond bracelet she had used like a weapon the night before. She kissed Victor's cheek in front of everyone and whispered, "Big day." Victor did not smile. Very big. Olivia stood near the service wall with a tray of coffee, wearing the same black uniform, her curls pinned neatly, her face calm enough to make Rachel stare at her in wonder. Only Victor knew that Olivia had slept less than 2 hours. Only Olivia knew that Victor had spent the rest of the night moving quietly through his own empire, calling accountants, reviewing camera footage, and asking questions with the patience of a man closing every exit before opening a door. Martin Hale sat at Victor's right, pale but composed, with a new folder under his hand. Across the table, Celeste's father, Richard Harrington, laughed softly about weather, traffic, and tradition, as if the morning were nothing more than a family celebration. The guests settled. The staff lined the walls. The room waited for Victor Lancaster to pick up the pen. He reached for it slowly. Celeste's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. Olivia saw it. A tiny movement, almost invisible. Liars do panic, she thought. Victor opened the folder, turned the first page, then stopped. Before we continue, he said, his voice even, Miss Brooks has something to say. The silence was immediate. Not polite silence. Shocked silence. Heads turned toward Olivia as if a painting had suddenly spoken. Celeste laughed once, too quickly. Olivia? The maid. Victor looked at her, and the room cooled. Yes. The only person here who read the agreement honestly. Color moved beneath Celeste's makeup, but she recovered fast. Victor, this is humiliating. We are not asking household staff to comment on legal documents. Olivia felt every eye on her, every old lesson trying to pull her gaze back to the floor. Then she thought of her father at the kitchen table, lining up receipts by date, believing truth had a shape if someone was brave enough to follow it. She stepped forward. The tray was no longer in her hands. Rachel had taken it without a word. Olivia stood beside the table, not behind it, and pointed to page 42. Her voice was soft, but it carried. This section creates an advisory board that does not appear in the summary. Page 56 gives that board temporary voting authority. Page 63 defines emergency conditions broadly enough to include almost anything that might question Mr. Lancaster's ability to lead. No one moved. She turned another page. The authority routes through a trust, then a Delaware holding company. The initials CHG appear in 3 witness codes tied to those transfers. Martin slid a document forward. Celeste Harrington Grant, he said quietly. Celeste's smile vanished. Her father sat back. Olivia continued, each word steady, each sentence removing another layer from the lie. This is not just an agreement. It is a mechanism. Once signed, it gives the Harrington side a path to influence assets they do not openly control. A man at the far end of the table muttered, "This is absurd." Victor finally set down the pen. The sound was small, but everyone heard it. "Then you will not mind seeing the evidence." Victor gave no signal that anyone else could see. He simply looked toward the far wall, and the large screen that had been hidden behind a framed oil painting came to life. At first, the room showed only silent footage from the pantry the night before, Celeste entering with the cream envelope, placing it behind the tea tins, then waiting just long enough for Olivia to discover it. The angle was high, clear, and merciless. No one spoke. The footage shifted to the ballroom, where Celeste's bracelet slid from her own wrist before she stepped back and looked directly at Olivia. The room watched the accusation happen again, this time without the protection of performance. Rachel covered her mouth. One of the Harrington cousins lowered his eyes. Celeste sat perfectly still, but the confidence had drained from her face like color from a photograph left too long in the sun. Victor did not raise his voice. "You put a false accusation on a woman who works in my home because she noticed the wrong envelope." Celeste turned toward him, her voice tight but polished. "That is not what this shows. You are letting a servant twist things because she wants attention." The word servant landed in the room and broke whatever fragile dignity Celeste had left. Victor's eyes hardened, not with noise, but with certainty. "Careful." Martin Hale opened the second folder and passed copies across the table. Bank references, draft revisions, delivery logs. Every page was marked, highlighted, and matched to Olivia's explanation. Richard Harrington reached for one document, then stopped when he saw his own assistant's name in the chain of approvals. The quiet became heavier. It pressed against the windows, the roses, the polished silver pens that no one would use now. Olivia stood near the table with her hands relaxed at her sides, but inside, Something in her was shaking loose after years of being held too tightly. She had watched men dismiss her father with phrases like unfortunate misunderstanding and internal review. She had watched truth drown beneath better suits and louder names. Now, for once, the lie had nowhere graceful to stand. Celeste tried once more. Victor, please. This is business. Families protect themselves. You know that better than anyone. Victor looked at her as if he were seeing her clearly for the first time. You did not protect your family. You tried to build one by humiliating someone you thought no one would defend. He removed the engagement ring from the table where Celeste had placed it before signing and set it on top of the unsigned agreement. The sound was barely more than a tap, but it ended an empire she had already imagined in her name. There will be no marriage, he said. There will be no alliance. Celeste's father rose halfway from his chair. Victor, think carefully. Victor turned his gray eyes on him, and the older man sat back down without another word. No threats were needed. No spectacle. Just the collapse of people who had mistaken quiet for weakness. Victor looked toward the staff lined along the wall, then toward Olivia. Miss Brooks was searched in front of my guests last night for something she did not take. She was spoken to as though dignity were a privilege this house could grant or remove. He paused, and even the chandelier seemed to hold still above them. That instant, Olivia's throat tightened. He did not call her poor. He did not call her loyal. He did not call her lucky. He called her by her name. Victor faced the room again. Everyone who works in this house will be addressed by name. Every staff contract will be reviewed with outside counsel. Every complaint will require evidence, not status. His gaze returned to Celeste, cold and final. You mistook silence for permission. Then he turned to Olivia, and his voice changed just enough for the room to understand that the judgment had become something more honest than power. And I mistook dignity for obedience. The room went still in a way Olivia had never heard before. Not the stillness of fear. The stillness of people finally understanding who had been standing in front of them all along. 3 weeks later, the Lancaster mansion no longer sounded the same. It was still large, still filled with marble, old wood, and windows tall enough to hold the morning sky, but something in its rhythm had changed. Staff members spoke a little more clearly when they answered questions. Names were used where labels had once been. Rachel no longer flinched when a guest looked impatient. The kitchen schedule had been rewritten, overtime was paid properly, and every employee had received a copy of a new contract reviewed by a law firm that did not belong to the Lancaster family. Olivia Brooks noticed all of it from a different room now. Not the pantry, not the service hall, the library. She sat at a walnut desk near the east window, sunlight falling across folders stamped with the seal of the Lancaster Foundation. Her new title was printed on a brass nameplate, so clean it still looked unreal to her. Compliance advisor. Victor had not offered it like charity. He had placed the position description in front of her one morning and said, "You know how lies hide in paperwork. Help me build something that finds them before they ruin people." The foundation had existed for years as a polished tax-friendly symbol, but Olivia changed its purpose within 10 business days. Legal aid for workers falsely accused by employers. Emergency grants for families fighting wrongful financial claims. Independent accountants assigned to review cases where the poorest name in the room had been chosen as the easiest blame. It was not enough to bring her father back. Nothing would ever be enough for that. But on the first Friday of March, Olivia stood in the foundation office and watched a retired bus driver cry quietly after learning his debt case would be reopened. She thought of Harold Brooks then, of his brown jacket, his careful envelopes, his pencil tapping against a kitchen table in Brooklyn. Money leaves footprints. Follow them honestly. That evening, she returned to the mansion to collect a file Victor needed for a meeting. The ballroom was empty, the chandeliers dimmed, the mahogany signing table gone. Only the white marble remained, shining under low light as if it had never witnessed a public life fall apart. Olivia paused near the spot where Celeste had accused her. For a moment, she could still hear the silence after the bracelet hit the floor. Then another sound came, softer, steadier. Footsteps. Victor stopped a few feet away, wearing a dark overcoat, his expression unreadable in the gold hallway light. "You avoided this room for 3 weeks," he said. Olivia kept her eyes on the marble. "I was not avoiding it. No, I was waiting until it felt smaller." Victor looked around the ballroom, then back at her. "Does it?" Olivia considered the question. The room was still enormous. The ceiling still towered. The windows still reflected a life most people only saw from sidewalks and magazine covers. But it no longer felt like a place where truth had to kneel. She nodded once. Yes. Victor reached into his coat and handed her a small cardboard box. Inside was her father's old case file, newly copied, newly organized, with a letter from an investigator confirming that the original records had been reopened for review. Olivia did not speak. Her hand rested on the lid, as if touching it too quickly might make it disappear. Victor's voice stayed low. It may take time. It may not give you everything you deserve. But someone is reading it now. Olivia closed her eyes, and when she opened them, there were tears there, but no shame in them. He waited a long time for someone powerful to care about the truth. Victor looked toward the empty ballroom where his signature had almost cost him everything. Then back at the woman whose quiet sentence had saved more than his empire. Then I am late, he said. Olivia held the box against her chest, not as a servant carrying something for someone else, but as a daughter carrying a piece of her father back into the light. Outside, New York moved on in sirens, headlights, and winter wind. Inside, the mansion was quiet, but not the old kind of quiet. This one did not hide cruelty. This one made room for dignity. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.